The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, carried by a dust-covered rider who'd traveled 3 days from Cheyenne. Silas Boone stood in the doorway of his weathered ranch house, squinting against the harsh Wyoming sun as the man handed it over. His calloused fingers, scarred from years of rope burns and gunfights, trembled slightly when he saw the handwriting. "From Jeremiah," he muttered under his breath. The rider was already mounting up, heading down the trail before Silas even finished speaking. He waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded into the wind before breaking the seal. The parchment crackled in the dry air as he unfolded it. His old friend's neat script was steady as ever. "Sil, I heard about your mother's passing. Martha was a fine woman. A man shouldn't be alone in that big house, not after all you've been through. I've taken the liberty of arranging something. There's a young woman, Clara May Henderson, who needs a new start. She's 23, educated, and knows her way around a home. She'll arrive on the 15th if you're willing. If not, send word immediately. Your friend, Jeremiah Wall." Silas read the words twice before folding the letter and tucking it carefully into his shirt pocket. A mail-order bride. The very thought made him uneasy. At 35, he'd long since given up on the idea of companionship. The Comanche Wars had taken something from him that never came back. The bounty hunting years after that had hardened what was left. But Jeremiah was right. The ranch was too much for one man. His mother's passing had left the house empty and silent. The vegetable garden had withered, dust gathering on the table where her Bible used to sit. The 15th, 5 days away. 5 days to decide whether to open his door to a stranger or send her away before she ever came. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching the wind move through the tall prairie grass before stepping back inside the lonely house. Clara May Henderson pressed her face against the window of the stagecoach, watching the land change from the civilization of Cheyenne to the raw, untamed stretch of Wyoming territory. Her reflection stared back at her. Pale skin made paler by travel, blue eyes shadowed with exhaustion and worry, blonde hair pulled into a tight bun. She'd grown good at making herself small and quiet. Safer that way. "Willow Creek Station," the driver called out. Clara's stomach clenched. This was it. The end of one life. The uncertain beginning of another. She didn't know Silas Boone, only that Jeremiah Walsh had promised he was a decent man. She had trusted a man's promise before, and that trust had almost destroyed her. But she had no choice now. Her money was gone, and her options had run dry. The coach lurched to a stop in front of a modest building that served as post office and general store all in one. Clara gathered her carpet bag, everything she owned in the world, and let the driver help her down. Her legs shook, though she couldn't tell if it was from the long journey or fear. "You Clara May Henderson?" The voice came from behind her, low, rough as sandpaper. She turned. A man stood beside a weathered wagon, hat pulled low against the sun. When he lifted it slightly to get a better look at her, she froze. Silas Boone was not what she'd expected. Tall and lean, his strength came from years of hard labor, not leisure. His face was weathered but not old, with lines that spoke of long days under open skies. Dark hair, longer than fashion allowed, curled at his collar. But it was his eyes, gray as a storm over the plains, that caught her. Eyes that looked tired and kind all at once. "I am," she said softly. He studied her a long moment before stepping forward, not close, just enough to reach for her bag. "I'm Silas. The ranch is about an hour's ride. You need anything from the store before we go?" Quote. She shook her head. He nodded, loading her bag into the wagon bed with surprising care. When he offered his hand to help her climb up, she hesitated only briefly before taking it. His palm was rough and warm, and he let go the moment she was settled. The ride began in silence. The wagon jolted along the rutted trail, and Clara kept her hands folded tightly in her lap. Silas handled the reins with practiced ease. "Jeremiah didn't say much," he said after a while, "just that you needed a fresh start." "Yes." The word came too quickly. She softened her tone. "Yes, that's right." He nodded, asking nothing more. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but careful. The land rolled by, brown and gold, endless and open. Clara had never seen such space. It made her feel small but free in a way she hadn't felt in years. "That's the ranch," Silas said finally, pointing ahead. Through the heat shimmer she saw it. a cluster of buildings rising from the prairie like ships at sea. The main house was plain but solid, a barn nearby, corrals stretching beyond. It wasn't grand, but it looked safe. As they drew closer, she noticed signs of neglect, weeds in the garden, laundry long forgotten on the line, a broken shutter swaying in the wind. "My mother passed 2 months ago," Silas said quietly, reading her thoughts. "I've done my best, but—" He shrugged. "I'm sorry for your loss," Clara said gently. He nodded, pulling the wagon to a stop in front of the porch. "You can take my mother's room. It's the largest. I'll use the back." "That's not necessary." "It is," he said simply. "You'll want your privacy." She followed him inside. The house smelled of wood, smoke, and age. The furniture was simple but sturdy, covered in a thin layer of dust. A large fireplace dominated the main room. It felt lonely but not unkind. "I can cook," Clara offered quickly when he mentioned supper, "and clean, tend the garden, mend clothes, whatever needs doing." He raised a hand. "Easy. I'm not looking for a servant, Miss Henderson. Just someone to share the load." The gentleness in his voice nearly undid her. She'd expected demands, commands, maybe worse. But this quiet respect, was somehow more frightening than cruelty. "I'll leave you to settle in," he said, stepping toward the door. "Supper's at sundown. I'll be in the barn if you need anything." When he was gone, Clara sat on the edge of the bed that still smelled faintly of lavender and age. For the first time in years, she allowed herself one moment to shake. As night fell, she lit a single lamp and looked out the window. The wind whispered across the prairie, rattling the loose shutter. She saw a faint light glowing from the barn where Silas worked late. He was giving her space, she realized, sleeping with the horses rather than under the same roof with a woman he barely knew. The thought made her throat tight. She pressed her hand to the cold glass and whispered to herself, "I will earn my place here. I will survive." Outside, a coyote howled under the star-filled Wyoming sky, and Clara May Henderson lay down in her new home, not knowing that the man in the barn carried secrets darker than the night, and that her own secret would soon shake him to his very core. The days began to settle into a quiet rhythm. Clara rose before dawn to start the fire and prepare breakfast. Silas would already be outside with the horses, checking fences or tending to the cattle. They'd eat together in near silence, two strangers learning how to share the same space without stepping too close. She cleaned, cooked, and tended the garden while he worked the range. They spoke only when necessary, about supplies, the weather, or the animals. It was an odd peace, but it was peace nonetheless. Still, sometimes Clara caught herself studying him. The way his shoulders filled the doorway, the patience in his movements when breaking a young horse, the quiet strength he carried. There was kindness there, hidden beneath the scars and the silence. But there was pain, too, like something heavy chained to his soul. This morning felt different. The air was too still, the sky thick with clouds promising rain. Silas lingered over his coffee longer than usual. "I need to ride into town," he said finally. "Supplies. Thought you might want to come along. Could use a few things yourself." Clara hesitated. The idea of walking through town, being stared at, whispered about, it made her stomach tighten. But when she looked at him, she saw something almost like hope in his eyes. She nodded. "All right, I'll get my bonnet." The trail to Willow Creek wound through rolling prairie dotted with cottonwoods. Silas pointed out nearby ranches as they passed. "Garrett place over there. Hendrick's family next ridge. Widow Morrison's farm down that way. Good folks, mostly." When they reached town, Clara could feel eyes on her the moment she stepped from the wagon. A new woman in a small place always drew attention, especially one arriving beside a man like Silas Boone. "Mrs. Boone." A woman's voice called out cheerfully. Clara turned to see a plump woman in a flour-dusted apron approaching. "Well, land's sake, Silas, you didn't tell us you'd gone and gotten yourself a wife." "Mrs. Patterson," Silas said, tipping his hat. "This is Clara." Clara forced a polite smile. "It's nice to meet you." Mrs. Patterson's eyes were kind. "You must come by for tea sometime. Not often we get new faces here." Before Clara could answer, others had gathered. Curious faces, eager questions. Where was she from? How did they meet? Did she like Wyoming? Clara answered politely but vaguely. Missouri, through a mutual friend. Yes, Wyoming was beautiful. Silas stayed close, silent but steady, his presence a shield. When the crowd grew too thick, a booming voice cut through. Give the poor girl room to breathe. The crowd parted for a tall man with a sheriff's badge gleaming on his vest. Tom Morrison, he said with an easy grin. Welcome to Willow Creek, Mrs. Boone. Clara nodded, but the look exchanged between the sheriff and Silas told her there was history there, history that wasn't friendly. Inside the general store, Clara tried to focus on the bolts of fabric, the neat rows of canned goods. She was admiring a piece of blue calico when she heard low voices from the next aisle. Surprised he found anyone willing, one woman whispered, after what happened during the wars and those bounty years. Hush, Edith. He's trying to live decent now. Maybe so, but blood doesn't wash off easy. Clara's hand tightened on the cloth until her knuckles went white. She turned her face away, pretending to examine a display of thread. When Silas appeared beside her, she forced a smile. Find something you like? He asked. Just looking. He studied her face, eyes narrowing slightly. Then he said quietly, Get whatever you need. There's credit here. The ride home was silent. The wind whistled low through the grass, and the sun slid toward the horizon. Clara wanted to ask what they'd meant, about the wars, about bounty hunting, but she was afraid of what the answers might be. You're wondering, he said at last. About what they said. She glanced at him. Yes. It's true, he said simply. Most of it. I scouted for the army during the Comanche Wars. Did things I ain't proud of. Afterward, I hunted men for money. Thieves. Murderers. The kind that hurt the weak. Told myself I was doing right. His jaw tightened. But killing's a habit once it gets in your bones. Took me a long time to quit. Clara stared down at her hands. And now? Now I'm trying to remember what it's like to live without ghosts. That night, after supper, he didn't go out to the porch like usual. Instead, he stayed at the table, turning his coffee cup slowly between his hands. My mother used to say, laughter made a house a home, he said quietly. Been a long time since there was laughter here. Clara stopped her sweeping. Was she happy here? He nodded. Happy enough. She loved my father fierce. Followed him out here when folks said she was crazy. Stayed after he died. Said the land was in her blood. She smiled faintly. She sounds like a strong woman. She was. Stronger than me. The air between them felt heavier now, filled with something unsaid. Clara wanted to tell him he was wrong, that strength looked like a man who gave a stranger his mother's bed and slept in a barn so she could feel safe. But her throat closed before she could speak. The next morning dawned gray and humid, the sky promising a storm. Clara woke feeling dizzy but brushed it off. There was work to be done. She was in the garden, tying up bean vines when the first wave of dizziness hit. Her knees buckled, and she gripped the fence to steady herself. The world tilted. Then everything went black. When she came to, she felt strong arms lifting her. Panic flared, and she thrashed weakly. Easy, came a voice rough with worry. It's me, Silas. You fainted. His hands were warm, careful, but the touch sent fear slicing through her. No, she gasped, trembling. Please, don't. He froze. Immediately, he stepped back, hands raised. Clara, look at me. I ain't gonna hurt you. I just want to help. Her breathing slowed. The rain was falling now, soaking them both, plastering her hair to her face. He waited, not moving, until she finally whispered, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Nothing to be sorry for. His voice was soft. Can you walk? She tried, swayed, and he caught her again, this time with a gentleness that broke her heart. He carried her into the house, set her in a chair near the fire, and knelt before her, dripping wet. I'll get you some water, he said, but she caught his sleeve. How did you know? Storm came in faster than I expected, he said. Thought I'd better check the stock. And you. When he brought her water, she saw his hands were shaking slightly. The sight of it undid her. I'm sick, she said quietly. Have been for years. The spells come and go. Sometimes I get warning, sometimes not. Quote, "He absorbed this in silence. What does the doctor say?" She gave a bitter laugh. "Doctors cost money. My late husband didn't believe in spending coin on female complaints." Silas's expression darkened. "You were married before." She nodded. "He died 8 months ago. His heart gave out. I left Missouri soon after." "That why you needed a fresh start?" "Part of it." She looked down at her trembling hands. "I have nothing, Mr. Boone. No family. No home. When Jeremiah wrote about you, it sounded like salvation. But instead, you got a broken ranch and a woman who faints in her garden." Silas looked at her for a long moment. "We all got our ghosts, Clara," he said softly. "Some of us just hide 'em better than others." Outside, thunder rolled over the prairie. Inside, the fire crackled. For the first time since she'd arrived, Clara felt something stir that wasn't fear. It was the smallest thing, a spark, but it was enough to warm the cold places inside her heart. And though neither of them knew it yet, that night's storm would mark the beginning of something that would change both their lives forever. The storm came in heavy that night, slamming against the walls of the ranch house with the force of a freight train. Wind howled through every crack, and thunder rolled across the open plains like the wrath of God himself. Inside, the little cabin glowed with firelight. Silas sat near the hearth, mending harness straps, pretending not to glance toward the closed bedroom door every few minutes. Clara had gone to bed early, claiming exhaustion after her fainting spell, but the truth was, she'd been trembling ever since. Not from sickness this time, but from something far more dangerous. For the first time in years, she had seen what gentleness looked like in a man's eyes. It terrified her more than cruelty ever had. When Silas finally rose to check the shutters, the floorboards creaked softly behind him. Clara stood in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, her face pale and unsure in the firelight. "You should be resting," he said quietly. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "The wind sounds like it's trying to tear the roof off." He gave a faint smile. "It's just the land reminding us who's boss." Clara hesitated before taking a slow step closer. "You're staying up?" "Someone's got to keep an eye on things," he said. "Storm like this, you never know when a shutter or fence post'll give." She nodded, clutching the blanket tighter. For a long moment she just stood there, the fire flickering between them. Then she whispered, "You don't have to sit out here alone." He froze at that, eyes lifting to hers. Something deep in them flickered, a mix of surprise, caution, and longing. "Clara," he began, voice low, "I ain't the kind of man who—" "I know," she interrupted gently. "You're the kind of man who sleeps in the barn so a stranger can feel safe. The kind who carries her in from the rain and never asks questions he has no right to. That's exactly why I don't want you sitting out here alone tonight." Silas looked away, jaw tightening. The fire popped loudly, and outside the storm roared. Finally, he nodded. "All right." They sat across from each other, the fire between them, both pretending to be comfortable while their hearts pounded hard enough to drown out the thunder. After a while, Clara spoke softly. "You said once that everyone's got ghosts. I think mine still follow me, even out here." He glanced at her, his face unreadable. "You don't have to tell me." "I do," her voice trembled, "because you should know who you've let into your home." She looked into the flames as she spoke. "I was 16 when I married Edgar Thornton. My father owed him money. He said giving me would settle the debt." Silas didn't move, didn't speak, just listened. He was almost 50, a store owner. Everyone said I was lucky. But luck doesn't leave bruises where folks can't see. He never raised his voice, never hit me. He didn't have to. He preferred quieter methods, ones that didn't show on the skin. Her fingers twisted the blanket so tightly it nearly tore. "For 7 years I was his possession. A perfect wife. Silent, obedient, empty. When he died, I thought I'd finally be free, but he left debts and a cousin who tried to claim me as payment." Her voice cracked. "That's why I ran. That's why I came here." Silas leaned forward, his gray eyes shadowed. "You don't have to apologize for surviving." Her breath hitched. "When I fainted and you touched me, just for a second, it felt like him again. My mind knew better, but my body didn't." He looked away, jaw clenched so hard she could see the muscle jump. Then he spoke, voice rough as gravel. Clara, if I could take away what that man did, I would. But all I can promise is this. You'll never flinch from me again. Not ever. Tears blurred her vision. You already keep that promise, she whispered. The storm raged outside, but something inside the house had shifted. The air felt different now. Thicker, warmer. Silas stared into the fire. You want to know about my ghosts? She nodded. I killed men, he said simply. At first in war, then for bounty. Told myself it was justice, that they were bad men. But after a while, I couldn't tell anymore. The line between right and wrong blurred until everything just turned red. He stared into the flames. One time, I brought in a man alive. Thought I'd done good. A week later, his wife and baby were dead. Starved, they said. Couldn't go on without him. That's when I quit. Came home, built this place. Tried to remember what peace felt like. Clara's voice was quiet. Maybe peace isn't something we find. Maybe it's something we make, with someone who understands. He looked up sharply, meeting her gaze. And for a moment, the storm, the ghosts, the pain, they all fell away. She reached out, hesitant, then placed her hand over his. His hand dwarfed hers, calloused and warm, trembling slightly. I'm not afraid of you, she said softly. You should be. She shook her head. No, you're my safe place now, Silas Boone. Something inside him broke loose then, a dam that had been holding back years of grief, guilt, and loneliness. He rose slowly, crossed the room and knelt before her. Clara, he said hoarsely, I don't know how to be the kind of man you deserve. You already are. The lightning flashed, thunder cracked, and their world narrowed to the glow of the fire and the rhythm of two hearts finding each other after too many years alone. When the storm finally passed, dawn crept across the horizon, painting the sky in pale gold. The house was quiet again. On the hearth, the last embers glowed faintly. Clara stirred beneath the quilt, feeling warmth beside her. Silas slept lightly, his arm draped across her waist. For a long moment, she simply listened to his heartbeat, steady, alive. For the first time since she was 16, she wasn't afraid of the morning. Outside, the prairie stretched endless and bright. The ghosts of their pasts had not vanished, but they'd lost their power. What remained was fragile and real, a beginning born from storm and survival. Silas would wake soon, and there would be work to do. The garden to tend, the horses to feed, fences to mend. But for now, she let herself stay still, memorizing the feeling of safety, of home. She whispered into the soft dawn light, You were right, Silas. The blood washes off if you find someone willing to help scrub it away. He stirred at her words, eyes opening, gray and clear as the Wyoming sky. You talkin' to yourself again? He asked, voice still rough with sleep. She smiled through the tears in her eyes. To you, Cowboy. Always to you. He reached for her hand and held it tight, his rough palm shaking just a little as the sunlight touched them both. Outside, a new day began, quiet, golden, and full of promise. And inside the small ranch house on the Wyoming plains, two broken souls finally found what they'd spent their lives searching for, not just survival, but peace.